For those of you joining us for the first time, the NUST Public Administration Society is one of Pakistan's leading student-led policy forums. Hamad already discussed that. We are committed to bridging the space between academic insight and the practice of governance. We're supported by the Jinnah School of Public Policy and Leadership and recognized by the Student Affairs Directorate of NUST. We aim to nurture informed, ethical, and analytically rigorous engagement with the issues that shape public life. I'll jump directly to the conversation. Today's conversation, the inaugural panel discussion, which is titled The Ethics of Modern Diplomacy, is very relevant to the ongoing turbulent times that we live in. The foundation of our discussion today is something very serious and often underlooked in the turbulent times that we live in. We have a number of ongoing conflicts, and unsurprisingly, a lot of them are multidimensional. So we see this trend worldwide that during these conflicts, our foreign services have expanded their scope and adopted sort of a multidimensional approach. So their services are required for conflict mediation, for discussions on trade, and even technical aspects such as digital policies, for instance. But today's discussion is not going to be about foreign policy priorities or strategic culture per se. We're aiming to focus on two essential aspects. We'll try to discuss the meaning and the operationalization of ethics at the state level. But what I'm more excited about is the interpersonal relationships and behaviors that our distinguished panelists from the foreign services have experienced in their lifetimes. And for those of us who follow the international affairs regularly, we must consider the fact that there is an entire humane dimension to external relations. It's not all macro in nature, it's not all interstate. There's also the conduct of people representing our country and shaping the foreign policy that can change the dynamics from beneath our feet. And so we're all very excited for this panel. I, for one, and certainly am. And without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Ambassador Azaz Chaudhry to make his keynote remarks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My first word must be of commending the faculty of Jinnah School on Public Policy and Leadership, particularly Dr. Hassan Jalil Shah, the principal, and also Dr. Uzair, the head of department, and Dr. Umaylela, the best teacher of the university. I would also like to thank you all, Alize, Hamad, and Ashar. You are already a veteran of this society, but the others are at the moment engaged in the work of this society, and I must appreciate, in fact, I was indicating to Dr. Hassan Jalil Shah my own preference for such societies to be cultivated in these universities rather than the kind of unionism. Because when I was studying that in the University of Engineering and Technology, Lahore, 1979, before I sat for the CSS, I do remember, the trade unions, the student unions were like trade unions. I mean, it was pathetic. And the energies are well spent in such societies. So I would congratulate the rector of the NUST for encouraging these societies. All right, now the subject is interesting, but also challenging, because we are living through a time when diplomacy is anything but ethical. But still, let's go about it systematically. Diplomacy, as you all perhaps are aware of, is not the foreign policy. Foreign policy is a set of goals that you achieve in your relations with the outside world. But diplomacy is the method to achieve those goals. So if it is a method, then there cannot be only one method. There will be different methods. There is a traditional diplomacy. You send your envoys, they represent you in that country, they negotiate agreements on your behalf, they report what's happening in that country. But in modern diplomacy, which is what we are considering under this panel, it has proliferated in its forms. There are now economic diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, social diplomacy, military diplomacy, public diplomacy, and so on. So the state wants to use every tool at its disposal to pursue its national interest. And that's where the problem is. Because if the national interest is that supreme, then sometimes you don't want to be ethical about it, because you think that pursuing your national interest is ethical enough. This is a larger objective, and if I have to bend my rules, that's fine. All right, now, but let's be also clear about the word ethics. What do we mean by ethics? Ethics, to my mind, is a set of rules, set of principles, values, norms, whatever you want to call it, by which a society, a country, and conductors of diplomacy are bound. How did it all begin? You will recall that in the Second World War, we witnessed utter destruction of we witnessed utter destruction of life and property. So a consensus emerged that interstate conduct must be governed by certain principles and values and norms and ethics. I think that was because you did not want to have another world war. And the answer was embodied in the United Nations Charter. How many of the students have ever read the UN Charter? किसी ने कोई हाथ उठाया ना? किसी ने UN Charter देखा? अब तो गूगल पे करें एकदम से आ जाती है, दर्जनों साइट्स आ जाती हैं. That charter, if you read, is an embodiment of the principles that states must follow in conducting their diplomacy. Now, what are those basic principles? मैं अभी आपको थोड़ा बताता हूँ. Every state must commit to respect the sovereignty of other states. In fact, so much so that the ethical foundation was to have sovereign equality. Sovereign equality does not mean that two states are equal. No, they can't be. India and Bhutan can't be equal. But they must be sovereign within their own domain, within their own country. So that's sovereign equality. You must also respect territorial integrity of other states. A state must also not interfere in the internal affairs of other countries, must not intervene militarily in the affairs of other countries. It must not engage in war but resolve its issues through peaceful means. The word in the charter is pacific settlement of disputes. That's the word. So the question to ask is this happening? Are we following that those rules or not? I think the answer is very clear. No. Countries now violate sovereignty of other countries and territorial integrity of other countries at the drop of the hat. They just don't care whether they were bound by that consensus, that ethical basis, not to violate these norms of interstate behavior. It started in 2003 when the United States decided to invade Iraq. what did it do? It violated two essential cardinal bases of ethical behavior. One, that it unilaterally decided that it has suspicion that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. So it became a judge and the jury and the executioner all by itself. And the second was that UN Security Council adopted a resolution that the United States must not invade Iraq. And the United States at that point thought that I do not agree with your logic. So it formed a coalition of the willing and went ahead. Now that set a very dangerous precedent because it has been then followed by Russia when it invaded Crimea in 2014 and then in Ukraine in 2022. It has also been followed by Prime Minister Modi, which aggressed against Pakistan in 2016, 2019 and lately in 2025. And now you see that this has proliferated, this tendency. People just don't care. And the defense that they have is that we are pursuing our national interests, as I said in the beginning, and therefore everything is fair in love and war. That's the argument they are using. So naturally, it takes the entire foundation of interstate conduct. It takes the foundation of it. So that's the problem. And now we also see Israel, for example. There were certain other principles and bases that were formed, like every society must respect human rights, right? There was a Universal Declaration of Human Rights by Eleanor Roosevelt of 1948 that human rights are sacrosanct. Are they? What about the human rights of the victims of aggression, like people of Gaza or people in Kashmir, and scores of other nations in Africa and Asia which are suffering from them? Even worse, some countries in the West now tend to use human rights as a coercive element. Not ethically, but coercive. For example, if they want to bash China, they will use human rights. Similarly, democracy, a great value, democracy. But even democracy has come to be used as a whip against certain societies because it gives the powerful ones the right to intervene in the internal affairs. And a perverted foundation of ethics came into being early this century. And I saw it happen. You all remember 2011, Arab Spring, when all these Arab societies were disrupted in the name of bringing a change in those societies and making them more democratic, more liberal, right? But when I was in the UN for a good 6.5 years, from 2000 to 2006, I saw a debate around the new ethics of R2P, responsibility to protect. And it was argued that if a society under some dictatorial regime is unable to protect itself or unwilling to protect itself, then it falls on the shoulders of the developed world to go and help these people. White man's burden to civilize these countries in the developing world. So that gave them the ethical foundation, because now they can invade Libya, they can invade Iraq, they can invade Syria, they can invade Yemen, but their conscience is not satisfied because we have this ethics that we are following R2P, responsibility to protect. What a clever way of justifying their aggression. That's what happened. All right. Will ethics return to our world? It depends on what the new world order will be. At the moment, we know that all the rules and norms of the old world order are not being applied. We just spoke about the aggressions and what have you. What will be the new world order then? Some people say that it will be a multipolar world with major powers having their own respective areas of influence, and they will be interacting with each other. You know, like a big boys club. You have the United States, Western Hemisphere, you have, say, Germany or Russia in Europe, you have China in Asia, and like that. India was also trying to do that, until late 2025 when it lost that credibility to be that big player. So, if that be the case, if this is the world order that we are looking at, which is going to come up in, say, about a decade, what about these smaller and vulnerable countries? What will happen to them? What about the medium-sized countries? What will happen to them? So what these states are doing is that they are now forming associations, mini-lateral associations, mostly regional, but unfortunately South Asia is not regionally integrated, and therefore it's, sort of diverse groups are being formed. You all hear about SCO and BRICS and many others have come up just to protect your interests. What should Pakistan do? And I think I should complete my talk in 8 minutes that you allotted to me. What should Pakistan do? 3 things. One, we should continue to voice our support for a rule-based world order. Because if we don't, then our powerful neighbor in the East will get a license to do whatever it wants to do at the expense of peace and harmony in South Asia. So for us, rule-based world order is better than the chaos, the disarray that we are looking at these days. Second, we need to closely link up to like-minded countries to hedge against aggressions by major players. Some countries have already done. For example, if you look at the Gulf Cooperation Council, these 6 countries in the Gulf region, they band together and they wield their collective power to protect their vulnerabilities. So, second, we need to, activate our diplomacy. Luckily, these days we are quite active. And the third, which is extremely important, that we must put our own house in order and never waver from conducting a diplomacy which is not ethical. The founder of our country, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, he had this to advise us on the conduct of diplomacy. He said that our foreign policy must be based on friendliness and goodwill towards all nations in the world. Friendliness and goodwill. These are the 2 words he used. Then he said that in the pursuit of this objective, we must be guided by the ethics or principles of honesty and fair play. Honesty and fair play. Again, these 2 words came from the founder of our country. And therefore, it is imperative for Pakistan to pursue a path of diplomacy which is ethics-based, which is rules-based. And I am glad in many ways we have done so. To give you one example, and then I will close, because then, Ambassador Bazar will supplement his thoughts. When Arab Spring was underway, India, for example, we had our friends on both sides of the aisle. Some wanted Assad regime to stay, some wanted Assad regime to go. We had friendship on both sides. But Pakistan took a principled ethical position that we do not support regime change by external forces. That was the principle we took. So as a result, we maintained our ambassador, our embassy in Damascus throughout the war and even today. So that I was very happy about, that our country chose a path which was in accord with the guidance of the founder of Pakistan. So I'd like to stop here and allow the program to proceed further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your meeting address. I think there are a lot of key takeaways and there are a lot of questions based on your keynote as well that the audience may have. I'd like to now give the floor to Ambassador Mazhar Javed to please deliver his keynote presentation.
Thank you, Ashwin. First of all, let me compliment and express my appreciation for the whole theme of this program, and particularly the fact that it is led by the students rather than by the administration itself. In effect, it is led by those who have to lead the world in the next 30 years, not by those who have already led the world in the last 30 years. It's a forward-looking approach. And thanks to Principal Saab Dr. Hassan Jalil Saab, Head of Department Uday Rashmi Saab, and our best teacher, not only of lungs, but I can also tell you the best teacher of Foreign Service Academy also. And the president of the society, Mr. Aliza Dasar. I would base my talk more related to my own experience. I was a part of Foreign Service Academy twice in my life. Once as a trainee, that was in 1990, and then as a Director General who had the academy, that was in 2022, in a gap of some 32 years. When I was a trainee, we were taught many things, and among those, ethics of diplomacy. There were two that I remember. One, respect for the cultural and religious norms of the host country. You don't have to mess up with that at all. That was a red line that we were told you have to follow. And the second was discretion. Always remain tight-lipped. What happened in the meeting is nobody's business until and unless it is announced through a formal channel or a press release. Right? And whatever was contained in that formal announcement was just the conclusion of it that was to be shared with the public. The rest of it was. So these were the two red lines that we were shown that you have to follow. Absent by its conspicuous by its absence was any mention of how to confront fake news. If there is some fake news being spread against you, what do you do about it? That is something that you will not taught. Then we went through a cycle of 32 years before I came back. What we saw in those 32 years was, one, I was sitting in Nepal as ambassador and I received a frantic phone call from the ministry. It was around 9:10 in the morning. And the colleague from ministry said that, "Mother, do you know what happened?" I said, "What happened?" That Indian media is claiming that Pakistan has launched a terrorist attack on the Indian consulate in the Biratnagar, which is a city in Nepal. In their consulate in Biratnagar, Pakistan has staged a terrorist attack, and Pakistan High Commissioner to India has been called for a démarche. So, quickly send us a rebuttal, draft us a rebuttal. I said, trust me, India does not have a consulate in Viratnagar. Right. So that was the extent or degree of the fake news. The one who concocted the news even didn't bother to Google and find out and name some organization which actually exists. In our diplomatic training in 1990, we were not taught how to confront it, what to do if such a thing happens. In 2020, 2019 is what we call the Info Lab, which was operated by India. It had spread so many fake news. Right? And I'm not saying it, trust me, out of my bias against India, I'm just talking about how diplomacy works. Right? It's a very, very neutral expression. Trust me, even if I were an Indian, I would have quoted the same example. Risking my job, obviously. So that was one major aspect. The second deadline that we were shown, the first major deadline that we were shown was that you have to respect the religion and culture of the host country. I went to Nepal and I was used to saying good morning or salam. But everybody was saying namaskar. So initially it was a bit difficult for me to digest whether I can say namaskar. But then you do adjust because you have to, the same deadline that you have to respect the culture and religious norms of the host country. On any occasion that I was invited as an ambassador, they would invite me to light a, would you say, diya, right? So 3 people would light it from different sides. And many months later, somebody told me that this diya is basically their god, the Shivaji. It is Shivaji ka diya. So again it became difficult. What do I do? For Surah class, dil mein padhte hue wo jalate the, but you would respect the cultural and religious norms of that country. Then I was posted in Islamabad, and we were discussing the GSP plus status which Pakistan has with European Union, and it has certain within quotes human rights conditionalities attached to it. Among those is the pressure from European Union that abolished the death penalty from your system. So that was one constant pressure that abolished death penalty from your judicial system, because that is against the European norms of human rights. Now, what's important is that it's against the European norms of human rights. It's not a universal thing. You have death penalty in America, you have death penalty in most of the Gulf countries, you have death penalty in so many countries in Asia Pacific, right? So that was a case where our religion, Islam, permits death penalty. Right? So it was something that was the messing up with our religious sensitivity. I took it as, in my own mind, I took it as a violation of the principle of respecting the host country's religious and cultural sensitivities. Then there were so many news of LGBT events being hosted by the Western embassies under the name of human rights. Again, you question yourself, isn't it a violation of our sensitivities on religion and culture? It is. It certainly is. And let me also quote a small anecdote over here. When I was posted in Berlin, a very important dignitary, I won't name him, he was being treated over there, and his second wife applied for a visa to take care of her husband. And the Germans refused that visa, saying that since our system, the German legal system, does not acknowledge the second wife, so we don't acknowledge her as a wife of that patient, and she can't visit. They refused the visa. And my question was, well, if it is going to be according to your cultural norms, then the visas to German diplomats who are posted in Islamabad will have to be issued according to our cultural norms. and we don't accept, our religion and culture doesn't accept unmarried couples. Right? So you will have a bigger problem than we can ever have. You will have problem with one visa, you will have problem with many visas. Right? And they got the kind of argument. So much for respecting the religious and cultural norms. The second guideline that we were shown was discretion and confidentiality. And then one fine morning, you see Donald Trump's meeting with the Ukrainian President Zelensky being aired on television, the whole of it, including the very, very uncomfortable exchanges between them being aired by. So where is that principle or ethic of confidentiality? Where is that element of discretion that we were told that we have always to remain tight-lipped? आपने बोलना नहीं है, हमने नहीं बोलना, वो तो टीवी पे सारी मीटिंग चल रही है ना, right? Again, you get into what's that? Then Donald Trump comes and he says that if India doesn't stop buying Russian petrol, he will have to pay 50% or higher tax. Right? Building that confidentiality, that art of negotiation and skills of diplomacy that we were told to follow, it's simple. Public announcement, do this, take it or leave it. Right? And incidentally, even that is a departure from the WTO rules on trade, to which both the countries are a party. So you see so many violations. Initially, I thought these are violations of the diplomatic ethics that we were taught. The question is, are these violations of the old diplomatic ethics, or are these the rules of the new diplomatic ethics which the world is going to follow in the next period, next maybe 50 or 100 years? Right? Whether it is a violation of the old ethics or this is setting the new normal. Here the context is very important. We were taught all these principles in 1990, and our teachers were those who had served in active service between 1950 and 1985 or 90. We served from 1990 till 2024. Right? The students that we are teaching now, they will be serving for the next 35 years. So it is exact 100 years cycle, the 3 generations. Diplomacy is not going to stay same on its ethics. It will evolve, it has evolved, and it will continue to change. I don't see these things as a violation of the diplomatic ethics. These are the new diplomatic ethics which are coming into existence, and we need to train our diplomats according to the new norms. That mythical past, even if you look at it historically, the ethics that we were taught were basically grounded in Vienna Convention of 1961. Right? The Vienna Convention of 1961. They were a part of that historical context. They were not, they didn't come from somewhere out of the blue or from nowhere. That was a requirement of those times. When Vienna Convention says non-interference in the host country, at the back of the authors of its mind were the propagation of the ideology, whether socialist or the otherwise, of those times. That was the time of 1951, the Cuban crisis and the threat of the Third World War and all that. Now things have changed. Now that Cold War is no more there, as the ambassador Esther said. First departure came up in early 2000, in 2001, I think. Okay. That was because before that everything was running according to the Cold War dynamics. That was a time when the world became unipolar, and the United States didn't feel the need to comply with the old norms, either of whatever. That was the time when new rules were being set. One country imposes sanctions against another country, and the entire world is expected to follow those sanctions. This is, you can call it a violation of the diplomatic ethics, but more appropriately, this is setting the new normal of the diplomatic ethics. We like it or not, but that's the way it is. What we need to teach our diplomats is according to the new norms. They must know that diplomatic ethics are right now in the state of flux, in the transition. They are emerging, they are changing, and equip them with the challenges that they are going to face tomorrow. I think I would end there. I've already taken, I think, more than the allocated time. But I hope I have been able to communicate something about what I wanted to say. Thank you.
आप इजाज़त दें
Absolutely, please.
ब्रदर साहब के 2-3 पॉइंट्स को मैं अगर कुछ कमेंट्स करूँ लाइटर वेन में डोंट वरी इन्होंने नेपाल गए तो इनको पता नहीं चल रहा था कि दिया जलाना चाहिए नमस्कार कहना चाहिए कि नहीं नमस्ते हम जब ट्रेनिंग कर रहे थे फॉरेन सर्विस की तो जनरल ज़ियाउल हक का दौर था आई एम टॉकिंग ऑफ 1981 तो हमारे जो मास्टर थे जो ट्रेनिंग करा रहे थे वो 1949 में आए थे और 1961 में रिटायर हो गए थे। अब उनको समझ नहीं आ रही थी कि हम तो बड़े लिबरल दौर में मास्टर थे, ये बच्चे जो आए हैं ये तो ज़ियाउल हक के इस्लामी दौर में हैं, अब इनको कैसे ट्रेन करेंगे। तो एक सब्जेक्ट था डिप्लोमेटिक थ्योरी एंड प्रैक्टिस, तो उन्होंने हमें सबक सिखाना शुरू किया। उन्होंने देखिए मैं डेनमार्क में एम्बेसडर जब लगा तो क्रेडेंशियल्स के बाद उन्होंने शैम्पेन सर्व किया, तो मुझे अब समझ नहीं आ रहा था कि मैं क्या करूं। एक तरफ होस्ट की नॉर्म्स हैं, होस्ट कंट्री से, दूसरी तरफ हम तो मुसलमान मुल्क के नुमाइंदगी कर रहे हैं। तो कहने लगे कि मैंने वो ग्लास लिया, होंठों तक लेकर गया, पिया नहीं, और खिसकते खिसकते एक गमले के पास जाके मैंने उसमें उंडेल दिया। हम में से ज़्यादातर लोगों ने इसका इत्तेफाक नहीं किया। अच्छा, दूसरा मैं आपको बताऊं कि इन्होंने कहा ना कि वो जर्मनी वाले ने कहा कि हम सेकंड वाइफ को तो नहीं मानते हैं। बाय द वे, फॉर द पर्पस ऑफ ट्रैवल आउटसाइड जो हमें मिलती है ना एंटाइटलमेंट, हम इस दूसरी बीवी को नहीं मानते। लेकिन उसमें यह है कि एक बार, एंड दिस वाज माय एक्सपीरियंस एज फॉरेन सेक्रेटरी, कि एक यूरोपियन मुल्क, नाम नहीं लूँगा, उन्होंने कहा जी ये साहब जो पोस्ट होके आ रहे हैं इनकी बीवी भी मर्दी है, क्योंकि सेम सेक्स मैरिज हमारे मुल्क में अलाउड है, तो इसलिए वो मर्द बतौर बीवी आएगा, स्पाउस। हमने कहा भाई ये तो हमारे तो नहीं अलाउड किया, तो क्या करें। वो कहते हैं डिप्लोमेटिक नॉर्म्स के हिसाब से, बयाना कन्वेंशन के हिसाब से हम आपकी रिस्पेक्ट करते हैं, तो आप हमारी रिस्पेक्ट कीजिए। तो उस वक्त मैंने ये फैसला किया कि जी वो एज स्पाउस तो नहीं आ सकता, विजिट वीज़ा लेकर आ जाए, आपके घर में रहता है तो रहे, जिस तरह भी रहना चाहते हैं, हम उसको कोई वीज़ा दे देंगे, सर्वेंट का, अटेंडेंट का, असिस्टेंट का, जो मर्जी आप करें, या एम्बेसी में किसी एम्प्लॉय का करते हैं, लेकिन हम सेम सेक्स मैरिज को रिकग्नाइज नहीं करते। सो समटाइम्स यू हैव टू टेक डिसीजंस बाय योरसेल्फ। एक और मिसाल में दूँ, चूँकि इन्होंने सारे एनेक्डोट्स सुनाए थे, तो मैंने कहा मैं ज़रा उससे समटाइम्स द डिप्लोमैट्स आर रिक्वायर्ड टू टेक डिसीजंस इन सच कॉन्फ्लिक्चुअल सिचुएशंस बेस्ड ऑन द पॉलिसी पैरामीटर्स। मुझे याद है कि 2015 में हमारे वज़ीर आज़म ने अमेरिका जाना था, सदर ओबामा से बड़ी अहम मीटिंग थी, तो उस वक्त एक शोशा छेड़ दिया गया। मैं गया हुआ था 2-4 दिन पहले तैयारी के लिए वाशिंगटन में, कि जी पाकिस्तान के जो न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स हैं वो सऊदी अरब को ट्रांसफर होने का पूरा प्लान बन गया। और ये खबर किसने दी? BBC। अब BBC कोई इधर उधर की तो फेक न्यूज़ नहीं है ना, इट्स अ वेरी नोटेबल न्यूज़ ब्रॉडकास्टिंग सर्विस। तो मैंने कहा कि भाई आई डेंट वेट फॉर एनीबडी, क्योंकि हमें क्लैरिटी थी। तो मैं एज फॉरेन सेक्रेटरी मैंने बिल्कुल दो अल्फाज में उसको डिनाई किया और मैंने कहा कि पाकिस्तान की जो न्यूक्लियर कैपेबिलिटी है इसका एक और वाहिद मकसद ये है कि अगर इंडिया से हमारे खिलाफ कोई एग्रेशन होगी उसको हमने डिटर करना है। दिस इज आवर पॉलिसी। और पाकिस्तान के मुतालिक ये जो बद खबर फैलाई जा रही है कि पाकिस्तान प्रोलिफरेटर है, बेसिकली वो ये कहना चाह रहे थे कि हम रिस्पॉन्सिबल नेशन नहीं है, हम दाएं बाएं बेच रहे हैं अपने न्यूक्लियर वेपन। सो समटाइम्स यू हैव टू एक्ट अकॉर्डिंग टू दी पॉलिसी पैरामीटर्स दैट, उसमें एथिक्स की बात नहीं है, उसकी पॉलिसी की बात है। चलिए गो अहेड, लेट्स गो कंटिन्यू।
Thank you, and I think there are a lot of areas that we covered in terms of ethics. It would be a bit difficult to sort of connect the dots with all of them. Since you have been discussing your experiences, and you Ambassador Javed, you mentioned the publicity and the media coverage for the Trump and Zelensky meeting. There was also an instance within this year, within the last 1 year, where a world leader was shown a documentary of his alleged corruption crimes. The point I'm trying to make is, and correct me if I'm wrong, these things are very spontaneous. I don't think the South African delegation would have known something like that is going to happen in the company of Mr. Trump. What kind of crisis mode do public service professionals go in when they experience something so out of the blue that it's difficult to comprehend?
नहीं वो आपसे पूछ रहे हैं, आप साउथ अफ्रीका में रहे हैं ना, आपसे मैं तो जवाब दे ही दूँ। अच्छा क्या सिचुएशन थी?
Mr. Trump showed a documentary video of Mr. Ramaphosa's alleged corruption crimes.
देखिए हमारे पास
And that was-
बड़ा सिंपल जवाब होता है ऐसी तमाम चीज़ों का। सिंपल जवाब ये होता है कि जी will reflect on it and come back to you. So you buy time basically, क्योंकि ना आप उसको endorse करना चाहते हैं तो वो फेक है या फेक हो सकती है, और ना ही आप उसकी इंसल्ट करना चाहते हैं जिसने ये हरकत की। वैसे डोनाल्ड ट्रम्प तो कुछ भी कर सकते हैं, तो लेकिन वो आप उसको फिर यू बाय टाइम टू गेट आउट, बिकॉज अगर आप उसको बहस करेंगे ले आएंगे तो वो आपके लिए ज़्यादा मुश्किल होगी। सो यू जस्ट फिगर आउट दैट। आई थिंक दैट्स व्हाट probably president of South Africa did.
So, just to conclude that area of argument, and the entire argument of sort of the erosion of diplomatic restraint, from your experience, where should the line be drawn between assertive statecraft and ethical norms? Because we have this tendency to see statesmen acting as strongmen to sort of assert their authority. Where does that fit in the ethical values of the diplomatic culture? Please.
Right. If you look at the recent trends, right, they basically revolve around one thing. The powerful states, or any state and their leaders, they are playing to an external or foreign gallery as much as they are playing to their domestic gallery. In their priorities, there are two things. How do they deal with a foreign country? In that, for example, in the example that you quoted, or in case of Zelensky, how do they deal with Russia or Ukraine? And at the same time, how can a particular issue or a meeting get him more local support, domestic support and domestic applause? You see that at the highest level in Indian foreign policy. Narendra Modi has been fishing for domestic support and local elections more than it has been wanting to gain national income, playing for the national interest of India. That is now the new norm. If you ask me a question, which way should you go? I would say always keep your national interest at the top. maybe Donald Trump being president of the sole superpower, or the biggest power, not the sole superpower of both नहीं रहा, but of the biggest power, he can still afford to go that way. But medium-sized countries like Pakistan, they have to maintain a clear trajectory where they cannot afford to be unethical or lose on their moral high ground. Many European countries, but one thing, trust me, if some countries say that we follow a foreign policy of values and not interest, they're not. At least I have absolutely no doubt or confusion, and I think we can talk here frankly, right, without naming any country. But if any country says that it is following a foreign policy of totally values, he's lying, they're lying. And secondly, every country in the world commits that lie. अपने एक मुल्क दिखा दें जिसकी foreign policy objectives में peace in the world or peace in the region now, right? Then where are all these wars coming from? तो वो तो एक basically हमारा that dimension of foreign policy we have to take it.
मैं जरा इस पे कुछ कमेंट दूँ. आपका जो सवाल मुझे समझ आया है, आप ये कह रहे हैं कि अगर कोई स्टेट असर्टिव हो जाए तो हम अपने इंटरेस्ट को कैसे प्रोटेक्ट करें उसके अगेंस्ट. ये
That and also the statement just sort of adopting an assertive personal behavior towards the representatives of other countries.
Alright, मैं एक मिसाल देता हूँ आपको. 26 March 2015, the Saudi Crown Prince decided to carry out military strikes against Yemen, formed a coalition and expected Pakistan to join it. जो उन्होंने प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस की उसके पीछे झंडे जो लगे तो उसका पाकिस्तान क्या था. अब हम क्या करें? हमारी पॉलिसी ये थी कि हम कहीं पे भी दूसरे मुल्क के अंदर रिजीम चेंज के लिए या मिलिट्री इंटरवेंशन को सपोर्ट नहीं करते. क्यों नहीं करते? क्योंकि अदरवाइज प्रेसिडेंट बन जाएगा. हमें तो एग्रेशन का सामना था, जाहिलियत का सामना था फ्रॉम आवर ईस्टर्न नेबर. लेकिन यहाँ तो सऊदी अरेबिया है, सऊदी अरेबिया के साथ तो बड़े हमारे ताल्लुकात भी हैं और प्लस वो हमारी मदद भी करते रहे. तो क्या किया? उस वक्त के लीडर्स जो हैं उन्होंने ये किया कि वो मामला भेज दिया पार्लियामेंट में. पार्लियामेंट में भेज दिया. उनको पता चल गया था ये नया आया है क्राउन प्रिंस, जोशीला है, ये इतना बड़ा इसने कदम उठा लिया, मुमकिन है इनके अपने इंटरेस्ट में भी ना हो. पार्लियामेंट ने कहा कि आप न्यूट्रल हो जाइए, न्यूट्रलिटी की बात की. बड़े खफा हुए सब ये, यूएई भी बहुत खफा हो गए पाकिस्तान से, आपको याद होगा. लेकिन चूंकि पाकिस्तान की अपनी अवाम का फैसला था, पार्लियामेंट से आया था, 3-4 साल बाद वो ना हो. तो मैं कह ये रहा हूँ कि अगर कोई पर्सनली भी ज़्यादा असर्टिव हो या स्टेट असर्टिव हो जाए, आपके जो अपने नॉर्म्स हैं उनको वायलेट मत कीजिए. थोड़ी सी कॉस्ट पे करनी पड़ती है, कर दीजिए. एक्सपीडियंसी जो है, इट डजंट मीन कि आप अपनी नॉर्म्स को वायलेट करें. तो उस हद तक एथिक्स आर रेलेवेंट. हम उसको अनएथिकल होने की आपको जरूरत नहीं है. मैं जब हम आए थे सर्विस में तो मुझे याद है कि हमें एक डेफिनेशन बताई गई थी डिप्लोमेट की, जिससे हम सारे इत्तेफाक नहीं करते. हमें ये कहा गया कि एक ब्रिटिश स्कॉलर डिप्लोमेट ने बनाई थी कि डिप्लोमेट इज ए पर्सन हु गोज अब्रॉड टू लाइफ फॉर हिज कंट्री. यानी अपने मुल्क के लिए वो झूठ बोलता है जाके. आई डोंट एग्री विद दैट. मॉडर्न डिप्लोमेसी में आपको झूठ बोलने की जरूरत नहीं है. आप क्यों बोलेंगे झूठ? तो एक और टर्म निकाल दी है, एम्बिग्यूटी. तो और खूबसूरती उसमें लाने के लिए कंस्ट्रक्टिव एम्बिग्यूटी. जब पाकिस्तान का न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स बन रहा था 80s में, 90s में, तो लोग आपसे पूछते थे आप न्यूक्लियर वेपन बना रहे हैं, तो हमने कंस्ट्रक्टिव एम्बिग्यूटी रखी हुई थी. ना यस कहते थे ना नो कहते थे, और कहते थे ये हम अपने नेशनल इंटरेस्ट के मुताबिक जो काम कर सकते हैं वो हम करेंगे, और जब वक्त आया तो हमने फिर वो उसको जाहिर कर दिया। तो ये जो ज़रूरी नहीं है कि आपको झूठ बोलना है, मैं कहना मतलब ये था कि आपको अपने नेशनल इंटरेस्ट को करना है प्रोटेक्ट विदाउट वायलेटिंग दी एथिकल कमिटमेंट्स दैट यू हैव मेड।
One point that I would take from both of your addresses, the most recent comments that you made, is that there is an influence of the domestic politics or the domestic culture on your practice. And I think there is another aspect that is worthy of more discussion. We know that we have a very theatrical domestic political culture here. And that includes sometimes when political leaders rally against a particular country. So from your vantage point, how do foreign counterparts of yours perceive that? Is it dismissed as some domestic rhetoric when the mass mobilization is gathering outside an embassy, for instance? Does that affect your relationships with the counterparts of that country?
Well, if I understand correctly, what you said is that we have a situation where there is more theatrics to our domestic situation, rallying against a particular country or against a particular motion, because the Indian embassy के बाद तो कभी नहीं किया, we do it for a different reason. As for the theatrics within domestic situation, see, we are not the only country to have that kind of situation. Rest assured. There are many misperceptions about us, which actually do not stand the test of reality and logic. At least half the countries in the world, they have that kind of domestic situation. ये नहीं है कि बाकी दुनिया में कोई खूब खेल रहे हैं तो हमारे कोई मसाइल हैं. Italy is the 8th largest economy, and if you look at its domestic politics, the average duration of a government in Italy over the last 50 years is less than 18 months to our political stability. And that is the 8th economy. Right? Many countries in the world have that kind of theatrics, and that is part of it. As for Indo, if your reference was towards India and Pakistan, where their entire political dynamic fought against one country, if your reference was to India, yes, it is a unique case. It is a unique case, but it is a unique case not because of any of our fault, and the whole world knows it. When you wanted to join ASEAN as a full dialogue partner, their main concern was this point, that if we include India and Pakistan both, there will be a Kashmir dispute over here. Right? So वो एक सबको the whole world knows it. Even Donald Trump ने भी कहा था कि Pakistan and India can live like good neighbors, and then he started laughing. That is fair. As for theatrics are concerned, पूरी दुनिया में it's not यूरोपियन मुल्कों में भी आप देख लें तो आपको ऐसी चीजें नजर आती हैं. पिछले 5 साल में आप देखेंगे जर्मनी के दो मिनिस्टर जो थे, they were caught for fake degree or doubtful. तो ये चीजें हर मुल्क में चलती हैं. If you talk of these criminal offences, just look at France. उनकी जो जिसे कहते हैं जुर्म का पूरा कहाँ तक जाता है, right? I won't name any. तो ये we are only, if only in our minds कि हमारे कोई बहुत ही खराब हालात है in many countries.
एक प्रेडिक्शन करूँ जी, अशरफ डिप्लोमेट बनेगा. हर सवाल में इतनी कंस्ट्रक्टिव एम्बिग्यूटी है कि हमें पूछना पड़ता था ये कह रहे हो ना, ये पूछ रहे हो. Go ahead.
No, I was just remark. I think I'll take it constructively.
Sure.
And
Say compliment.
the example I'm trying to pinpoint here precisely is the demonstrations that we've had recently outside some of the embassies in Pakistan. And in the last few years, I would pinpoint the examples of the demonstrations outside the US embassy and the French embassy. So from what I'm understanding from your comment is that these do not in any way influence the personal relationships or the interpersonal relationships that you've built with your counterparts. Or does that affect the relationships in any way?
नहीं करता है जी, नहीं करता। ठीक है ना, वो लेट्स से तहरीके लब्बैक पाकिस्तान ने कहा कि फ्रांसीसी सफीर को निकालो मुल्क से और हम आ रहे हैं सीरीना चौक पर और जाएंगे उसके सामने। सरकार पाकिस्तान ने एक जिम्मेदारी उठाई हुई है कि तमाम सफारत खानों की और बैरूनी सिफारतकारों की हिफाजत हमारी जिम्मेदारी है। तो इसलिए पाकिस्तान कभी भी ये काम नहीं करेगा और ना ही हम फ्रांसीसी सफीर को कहेंगे कि जनाब जो टीएलपी का एजेंडा है वो मेरा भी एजेंडा है, कभी नहीं करेगा। और आपको याद है कि 1979 में याद है आपको, जब खाना काबा पे कुछ डिसग्रंटल्ड एलिमेंट्स ने हमला किया था, बच्चों को तो याद नहीं होगा नेचुरली, लेकिन उनकी मालूमात है। तो कुछ जोशीले नौजवान उठे कायद-ए-आज़म यूनिवर्सिटी से, उन्होंने जाके अमेरिकन एम्बेसी जला दी, थिंकिंग कि ये इजराइलीज ने हमला किया है सऊदी अरेबिया में खाना काबा के ऊपर और अमेरिका की चूंकि उनको मदद हासिल है, चलो ये सफारत हमें जला। हमने 87 कार्स उनकी जलाए, लेकिन चूंकि हमारी जिम्मेदारी थी, वी पेड मिलियंस ऑफ डॉलर्स फॉर कंपनसेशन। तो क्या हमने उनके साथ ताल्लुकात अपने खत्म कर दिए? मैं कहता हूँ कि जी दुश्मनों के साथ भी आपको डिप्लोमेट्स को बात करते रहना चाहिए। अभी तो 9 साल से इंडिया पाकिस्तान के कोई टॉक्स नहीं हो रही, लेकिन आई एम पार्ट ऑफ द ट्रैक टू, और जून में भी हम इंडियन डिप्लोमेट्स के साथ बैठे हुए बात कर रहे हैं इन ए थर्ड कंट्री। तो द आंसर इज नो, इट डजंट अफेक्ट योर पर्सनल रिलेशनशिप। You give them the respect for defending and protecting their national interests, and we expect their respect for defending our national interests.
Just before we move on to the student engagement session, and just to brief all our audience on the student engagement sessions, every segment of the NUSTPAS dialogue series will have a short 5 to 10 minute segment before the question answer session, where we discuss some basic issues or basic skill building areas that are directly referred to our student audience that we have here. Before we move to that, I just have one more question from you each. Moving back to the idea of our relationships with India and your initial keynote address, where you said that we should never waver on ethical principles. We did not violate the UN Charter Article 51 when we responded to the surgical strikes of India. But that is something that we have a framework for. How do you deal with the issue that is caused by the Afghan interim government, which is not recognized by the international community at large? What sort of ethical principles do you consider in that regard?
I think in such cases it's the national interest. If Pakistan is defending itself, it doesn't have to rely only on Article 51 of the UN Charter. It's a common sense that you will protect. And what are you protecting? Since 2021, when the Taliban took over, every year has been bloodier than the previous year. And 2024 was the bloodiest year in the history of Pakistan in terms of deaths out of terrorism. So what do you expect? We should let the blood of our boys and girls and men and women flow just like that. So Pakistan has every ethical right to defend itself and act against terrorists wherever they are.
If there's anything you'd like to add to this.
Well, diplomacy is the first line of defense,
Right.
not the last. Right. So if your diplomacy doesn't work with Taliban, again, a regime, as you said, which is not recognized by most of the countries in the world, as per said, there's just two options: either to keep on leading yourself or to hit back. Diplomacy didn't work with Taliban. Simple as that. When it doesn't work, then obviously things go to the next level. And that's exactly what has happened. I'm not surprised by what we are doing, I'm surprised by how much tolerance we show. That was exemplary. And Afghanistan must appreciate our tolerance more than it has to figure out reaching the limits.
So based on your keynote address as well, do you think that in the future, when diplomacy will be completely different in its outlook, let's say 30 years, 40 years from now, do you think we will have a framework of dealing with such elements, a codified area that we can not face any ethical dilemmas with?
I hope we have.
Yeah, there are certain cardinal principles of interstate conduct that are a given. If you are aggressed against, you will react. You don't need any framework for that. So, but if you want to aggress against somebody else, now that, of course, some framework will stop you.
Just a final question before we move on to that segment. This is a discussion that we often have in our classrooms as well, and it's about the symbolic interactions and the messages that physical cues represent in our interactions. So we started the conversation by discussing the respect or the mutual respect of other cultures as well. I want to discuss the issue where, I wouldn't call it an issue, but the sort of the practice where countries do send female representatives to conservatively minded leaderships. So for instance, back in 2022 and 2023, we had a delegation that was led by the female officers of the Foreign Services Academy to the Afghan government. And the reason I'm sort of bringing this issue precisely is because the foreign ministries of the Afghan government do not really have these representations. So are we following a symbolic interaction, or is it something that has to do with the competence of those professionals in our foreign services?
I think to an extent we do respect the norms of the host country. आपको याद होगा कि ईरान में इस्लामिक रेवोल्यूशन के बाद वो ख़वातीन के बारे में जो उनका रवैया था इस हद तक चला गया हुआ था कि नॉन अलाइंड मूवमेंट की समिट हो रही थी, उसमें एक मुल्क की फॉरेन मिनिस्टर लेडी थी और वो ईरान डेलीगेशन ही नहीं गया उसमें कि इसमें खातून मौजूद है, इस लिमिट पे था। अब वो नहीं रहे, इट हैज़ चेंज्ड। अभी भी पाकिस्तान के जो उस ज़माने में रूलर्स जाते थे, बेनज़ीर भुट्टो साहिबा गई तो वो दुपट्टा ओढ़ लेती थी आउट ऑफ रिस्पेक्ट फॉर द कल्चर ऑफ दैट सोसाइटी। तो ये हो जाता है। मुझे मिसाल के तौर पर आपने कहा कि अगर तालिबान रजीम में कोई लेडी डेलीगेशन गई है तो वो शायद दुपट्टा पहन लेंगे क्योंकि आउट ऑफ रिस्पेक्ट for their culture. It's not a submission to their code of life. We are bound by our own cultural ethos. और एक और मिसाल है कि तुर्की में कानूनन हिजाब पहनने की यानी स्कार्फ की इजाज़त नहीं थी अगर आप गवर्नमेंट सर्विस में जाना चाहते हैं कुछ भी। प्रेसिडेंट एर्दोगान जब मेयर बने इस्तांबुल के और बाद में प्राइम मिनिस्टर बने और फिर प्रेसिडेंट बने, इनकी तो अपनी वाइफ पहनती थी हिजाब, तो आहिस्ता आहिस्ता वो बंधन टूट गए उनके। तो ये वो आपकी जो आपको फॉलो करना है आपने अपने उससे करना है। जब हम हज या उम्रा पर जाते हैं तो हमारी ख़वातीन को वहाँ का मर्द को भी आप निकर पहने नहीं जा सकते मिसाल, तो आपको नॉर्म्स तो फॉलो करने पड़ते हैं, करने चाहिए। और अगर आपको बहुत तकलीफ है तो मत जाइए उस जगह पे, थोड़ी बहुत रिस्पेक्ट करनी पड़ती है, उससे आपका कुछ नहीं घटता।
We'll now move to the student engagement session, and for that I would like to request our panelists to sort of address our students as they are currently sitting in the Foreign Services Academy and these are the things that you would like to incorporate or sort of like to deliver to the students of the Foreign Services Academy for their future services. So I would start by the simple idea that since you have both represented Pakistan in such turbulent times, if diplomacy is indeed the art of managing differences with dignity, as you just mentioned, then what ethical habits above all sustain a career in diplomacy?
I'll say three. One is knowledge. Knowledge gives you strength. अगर मैं किसी मीटिंग में गया हूँ और इल प्रिपेयर्ड हूँ, मुझे उस मौजू का पता ही नहीं है, तो मैं अपने मौक़िफ़ को बयान नहीं कर सकता. सेकंड, वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, आर्टिकुलेशन. अगर आप अपना मौक़िफ़ बयान ही नहीं कर सकते एक ऐसे अंदाज में कि लोग उसको क्या यानी समझें नहीं, so therefore you got to focus on learning the skills of articulating your views. Third, honesty and integrity should never be given up. Compromise मत कीजिए. और जो शख्स compromise एक बार कर जाता है, और ये बात सिर्फ डिप्लोमेट्स के लिए नहीं, मुझे याद है जब मैं सर्विस में आया, फॉरेन सर्विस में मैं आया, लेकिन पहले सिविल सर्विस में कॉमन ट्रेनिंग होती है, तो हमारी सिविल सर्विस एकेडमी में हमारे कोई रिटायर्ड सिविल सर्वेंट आए, तो उन्होंने कहा कि मैंने अपनी ज़िंदगी में ये देखा है कि आपको यू गेट ए सेट ऑफ प्लसेस एंड यू गेट ए सेट ऑफ माइनसेस, और हर एक के साथ ये होगा. सो डोंट सेल योरसेल्फ अप पेटी फेवर्स. इंटेग्रिटी के साथ जो जीना है, अब मिल जाएगा आपको हिस्से का. कभी आपसे कोई नहीं छीन सकता अगर आप एक यू लिव ए लाइफ ऑफ डिग्निटी एंड इंटेग्रिटी. जनाब जाहिर भी आए हैं, जनाब अली कैसे हैं लोग? ठीक. आपका हॉल हमने एक बार फिर बोरो कर लिया. थैंक यू. चलिए
Sir, please.
When we talk of the quality or the aspects that help us survive as a diplomat, at Foreign Service Academy we had a clear distinction between two things. One, academic discipline. You should know something of international relations, international politics, and that is very important for in our case, because our intake into foreign service is from diversity. They don't have any qualification related to international relations or political science. कोई डॉक्टर होगा, कोई इंजीनियर होगा, एक आर्मी का होगा, एक जो है वो ह्यूमैनिटीज से आया हुआ होगा, तो इट्स अ मिक्स्ड ग्रुप. Right? When you want to transform them into diplomat, you need a basic level. But still, I insist that you can live without that basic level. You cannot live without basic attitude. That attitude requires clarity of thinking. Absolute one. There is no compromise in that. Clarity of thinking. Critical thinking. You must question everything. And now I'm addressing particularly our younger students. If you want to be diplomat or successful in any department, in any field, focus on clarity of thinking. Question everything that is being said. Remember, to every thesis there is an antithesis, and unless you discard that antithesis, never believe in the thesis. That is very important. Nobody in the world is going to ask ever in your life कि जंग आज़ादी 1857 में हुई थी. But the basic analytical capacity, the analytical skills. Number two, expression. Have precision, accuracy of expression. That is very important. So ये quality है.
ये ऐसे एटीट्यूड की बात बड़ी अच्छी की आपने. The most beautiful short sentence that I ever came across was pasted on the entrance of a high school in Falls Church, Virginia, जहाँ मेरा बेटा पढ़ने जाता था. वो स्टेटमेंट थी, एटीट्यूड इज एवरीथिंग, एटीट्यूड इज एवरीथिंग. कम टू थिंक ऑफ इट, हाउ ट्रू. आप जो भी जिंदगी में करना चाहें, अगर आपका पॉजिटिव एटीट्यूड है तो यू विल सक्सीड. अदरवाइज जिंदगी एक बहुत बड़ा बोझ है.
You cannot survive just on the basis of knowledge. आप PhD कर रहे हैं, 10 कर रहे हैं.
एटीट्यूड ठीक
If your attitude is not positive, you must have the capacity to synchronize yourself with your environment. अपने हर 3 साल बाद नए शहर में जाना है. What do you do? Your first requirement is that you should be able to adapt to the new environment. वहाँ पे culture क्या है, system क्या है, what to do, what not to do. Then expression very important. Intellectual honesty. If you are at a senior position, sitting in a mission, here I think I can share a bit of candid.
Absolutely.
Some people have a tendency to report back what the leader wants to be.
पाकिस्तान में क्या सुनना चाहते हैं वो?
तो सुनना क्या है? If you report which is not the reality, but what the leader wants to be, trust me, you are not doing fair. No, you are not being fair to your job. आपकी तनख्वाह ही हलाल की नहीं. Intellectual honesty. And in recent times, a very, very important thing for my younger colleagues, artificial intelligence is a tool, it is not a substitute to your brain. Never use it as a substitute to your thinking capacity. ये आपको आपकी सोच नहीं बताएगा, ये आपको अपनी सोच बताएगा. Right? You must cherish and respect your own thinking. When somebody says it is food for your thought, it means it is food for your thought, right? Not my thought. Whatever I said, think. हो सकता है मैंने गलत हो, मैं कोई कॉन्शियस नहीं है. So ये जो mental capacity है ना, that is the primary requirement for being a leader.
Every time you provoke me to say something. I got posted as consular in our embassy in Washington in 1999. तो जिस कमरे में मैं बैठा था वहाँ पे एक अलमारी पड़ी थी, वो कभी खोली नहीं थी किसी ने, तो मैंने उसका ताला तोड़वाया. मैंने कहा देखो तुझे, तो उसमें फाइल्स निकली 1971 की. उनमें से एक फाइल में एक उस जमाने में जिस तरह टेलीग्राम्स भेजते थे, बड़े रुडिमेंट्री अंदाज में टाइप होती थी, उसकी कार्बन कॉपी पड़ी थी. सितंबर 1971 में हमारे उस वक्त के एम्बेसडर साहब ने किसी सेनेटर से मीटिंग की और उसकी वो रुदात पेश कर रहे थे कि जी सेनेटर को मैंने बताया कि ईस्ट पाकिस्तान में बिल्कुल कुछ नहीं हो रहा और ये सब प्रोपेगेंडा है. तो वो बड़ा मुतमईन हुआ. उसने कहा कि बिल्कुल आप बेगम हो जाए, हमें समझ आ गई है ये हुआ क्या. झूठ नहीं बोलना चाहिए, आपको ऑनेस्टी और डिग्निटी के साथ करना चाहिए, बिकॉज अदरवाइज आपकी अपनी कौम मिसलीड हो जाती है. मैं ये तो नहीं कह रहा वो कौन साहब थे, मैं नाम जानना चाहता हूँ उनका, लेकिन स्टिक टू इंटेग्रिटी, स्टिक टू डिग्निटी, stick to honesty, and that's somebody who is on the other side of the hill. After you are on this side of the hill, I'm on this side of the hill. I have nothing to gain from you, but this is my lifelong lesson. A life lived without integrity and dignity is a life wasted.
Before we just move to the Q&A session, there's just one final thought.
यार चलने दो ना क्वेश्चन.
ये सबका favorite question था, and this was meant for the closing. The generation that you're speaking with spends a lot of screen time. That includes a lot of exposure to TV and movie serials that sort of depict a picture of diplomacy. So if you ask anyone here what diplomacy means to them, the answer you get would be similar to what James Bond has taught them about espionage. They're fictional characters. Is there something in particular that you would like to add for the students to sort of get a reality and a real image about diplomacy instead of all the fluff and all the character-oriented images that we get?
I have found digital space to be of enormous resource and value. Yes, there is a perverted version of that. But to be honest, for example, I started writing my book last year. And every resource that I needed was available in the digital space. लेकिन ना मैं लाइब्रेरी जाऊंगा, वो किताब ढूंढूंगा, निकालूंगा, मेरे पास PDF वर्जन मिल गई उसकी। मैंने वही उसको बैठ के पढ़ा जब मेरे पास टाइम ना हो। या मुझे कोई गलती लग रही है कि ये स्टेटमेंट 2021 में हुई थी या 2020 में हुई थी, थक करके गूगल करूंगा मिल गई। तो ये जो इनॉर्मस रिसोर्स है आपके पास, इसको बेलिटल नहीं करना चाहिए। Yes, you are right कि वो इसमें जेम्स बॉन्ड भी होगा, उसमें depends on how, and that's why मैं मज़र की वो बात को तायद करता हूँ, attitude is amazing, कि आप उस नई टेक्नोलॉजी को कैसे इम्बाइब कर रहे हो, कैसे उसका इस्तेमाल कर रहे हो। छुरी जो है, a knife is good and bad. It can cut a fruit for you and it can cut somebody's throat. तो छुरी तो बजाते खुद बुरी चीज़ नहीं। इसी तरह digital space is very very valuable in my view. Depends on how you want to use that.
What I got out of perspective and beauty was the real life of the person of it, which is different from fictional character, obviously. If I have 20 lives and I have to choose a profession every single time, I would choose diplomacy every single time. No question.
This is coming from a medical doctor who studied in print advertisement.
But it does come with a price tag. For prolonged period you have to live out of the country. It affects your family life. It has the good and the positive. If both the husband and wife they are working, it has serious implications for the children or career of one of the out of the two. It was a pain living during COVID times for year after year, knowing that there are no flights. So it has a lot of fun attached to it. But then it also has a वो नसीब बोला आज कहती है ना रुलते गए हैं पर चस बढ़ी आई. So it is difficult, but वो चस आती है. So you have that fun part of it. So that is what I would say, that is the real life of a diplomat, which has good and bad turns and all that up and down.
Like every life.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think your last few phrases have been enough to increase the sort of excitement of foreign affairs among our peers. That'll be all from the segment, and I think we can now move on to the Q&A session. Since I apologize for taking too much time. I think I've taken quite a lot of proportion of the Q&A session, so we'll try to keep it short.
Right. Thank you to the panelists for systematically and constructively clearing up our ambiguities. A lot of questions remain, of course, but the ethos of this segment is to encourage that curiosity, bring out those questions so that we can widen and we can broaden this conversation, take it into new uncharted realms. One of the core principles of this segment is to create a space for young minds. So again, like Usher said, students, young practitioners developing their practice, they're encouraged to come forward and raise your hand or signal to the ushers, and so they can pass you the mic and obtain your question. Thank you.
सब टाइम बचाने के लिए सबके कमेंट्स ले लें और एक ही बात जस्ट टू सेव टाइम.
Assalamualaikum. I'm Fatima Afzal, currently doing Masters in Governance and Public Policy from JSTP and NUST. It was indeed an honor to listen to such distinguished intellectual personalities personalities discuss the ethics of diplomacy. My question is regarding the recent repatriation of Afghan nationals from Pakistan, which has drawn significant international criticism on ethical and humanitarian grounds. To what extent is this criticism justified, and how can the Foreign Office adopt a more ethically balanced diplomatic approach in addressing such sensitive issues? Thank you.
There was a question at the far end.
ये सामने बैठे हैं आप खड़ा करें
I think we'll take this question.
और
Assalamualaikum, sir. My name is Phoebe Asrar and I'm final year student economics, and I had the honor of serving as a youth ambassador from Pakistan through the IREX Global Undergraduate Exchange Program sponsored by the United States Department. In today's world where the ethics of modern diplomacy increasingly emphasize inclusivity, transparency, and mutual respect, how do you see youth diplomacy contributing to a more ethical and people-centered global order? Moreover, what kind of initiatives could Pakistan introduce to institutionalize youth participation in diplomatic and policy discussions, ensuring that young voices help shape the moral and strategic direction of our foreign policy in the years ahead? Thank you.
My name is Ibrahim and I am doing MS Governance and Public Policy from SGH. वैसे तो मैं कोई और सवाल पूछना था, लेकिन एज द एलुमनस ऑफ कायद-ए-आज़म यूनिवर्सिटी, आपने कायद-ए-आज़म यूनिवर्सिटी का जिक्र कर दिया तो वो मेरे दिल के बहुत करीब है। तो एक सवाल मेरा ये था कि पहले हमने अमेरिकन एम्बेसी वाला रोड बंद किया, उसके बाद अब जो चाइनीज़ एम्बेसी वाला रोड था उसको ब्लॉक किया गया चाइनीज़ एम्बेसी की तरफ से। तो क्या एथिकल कंस्ट्रेंट्स है, क्या सिर्फ पाकिस्तान की तरफ पाकिस्तान के मैसेज के एथिकल कंस्ट्रेंट्स हैं जो हमें उधर जाकर फॉलो करने हैं, क्या फिर कुछ ऐसे एथिकल कंस्ट्रेंट्स भी हैं जो दूसरी कंट्रीज़ को हमारे अंदर हमारी कंट्री में रहते हैं फॉलो करने चाहिए? एक ये, उसके अलावा जो हमने फिर बाहर से एक और रोड बनाई कायद-ए-आज़म यूनिवर्सिटी के लिए, तो उसकी जो उसके ऊपर जो कॉस्ट आएगी वो फिर चाइनीज़ एम्बेसी देगी या पाकिस्तानी गवर्नमेंट देगी, तो इस मामले में आपकी क्या राय है? थैंक यू।
I think we'll take a few very short questions if they're related to the ethics of conduct. I think we're getting a bit deviated.
Assalamualaikum. First of all, I would like to say thank you very much for your session today. It was a very informative discussion here, and I really think I learned a lot from this panel discussion. So my question here is basically recently there has been some discussions about why Pakistan does not have any diplomatic ties with Israel. And you know, the issue of Palestine, the genocide, the ongoing genocide is there. But despite that, some people argue that जैसे कि आप लोगों ने भी अभी डिस्कस किया, we should still have diplomatic ties with even our enemies. So there are some people who argue that we should have some sort of ties with our enemy countries as well. So what are your thoughts on that? I would just like to hear that.
Just one final question, then we'll. Okay, sure.
Assalamualaikum, sir. My name is Manahid Khan. I am a first semester bioinformatics student here at NUST at the School of Interdisciplinary and Engineering Sciences. Sir, my question is, looking 20 years ahead, what is the one outdated practice in diplomacy that you would like to see retired, and what should replace it?
Assalamualaikum. I'm Mr. Imtiaz. I'm a student of public administration. I'm doing a bachelor's right now, and I have two questions, if that's fine.
If we can keep them brief, please.
Okay, so the first question is that whenever an incident of political sensitivity happens, such as violence in Palestine or something happens on the line of control, so a phrase that we hear from the Foreign Office is "Sakt Muzammad." That Sakt Muzammad. So I always wondered as a student of public policy whether that phrase.
आप जो भी जवाब देना चाहते हैं तो मैं
I'll take on a few of the questions. One, beginning with the Chinese embassy thing, because that is again somehow or the other related to us. जो Chinese embassy की बात है ना, उनकी जो पुरानी embassy थी, we took it over, and that is where the current Foreign Service Academy is. So even if we paid for the cost of that road, it doesn't really matter much. हमारे शहर में नहीं है. But we took over their old embassy with the land and the building over their own. And it's a historic building. वहाँ पे आजकल हमारी Foreign Service Academy बनी हुई है. That was, they call it a gift. I think it had to retire because they couldn't take it back to Beijing. जो सख्त मुज़म्मत की आपने बात की है, सख्त मुज़म्मत seems to be a very non-committal, non-formality लगती है, but actually it is not. If you decipher it diplomatically, सख्त मुज़म्मत means that we do not stand with this action. One, our role is limited to a statement of opposition, right? And we stand with जिसके against whatever the entity is there. And at the end of the day, that मुज़म्मत does count. That मुज़म्मत does count, and the affected country या जिसकी support में आप statement दे रहे हैं, वो उसको acknowledge करता है किसी न किसी form में और किसी न किसी time में. See, there is something in India, and as a matter of reflex action as they have, मोदी साहब कहते हैं कि ये पाकिस्तान ने किया है, right? अब स्टेटमेंट्स आपको देखने में एक जैसी लगेंगी, राइट? कि कोई मुल्क कहेगा जी हम सब मुज़म्मत करते हैं, कोई कहेगा कोई somebody will remain silent, somebody will remain say सब मुज़म्मत करते हैं of the attack and any cross border terrorist activity, right? अब इन 3-4 के, and I can count 20 other states, उनकी इंटरप्रिटेशन डिफरेंट होगी, राइट? So it's not just कि अगर सख्त मुज़म्मत है तो it's just a pro forma thing. In Europe में जब पाकिस्तान में धमाके होते थे तो we will maintain a list कि जी किसने maintain किया है, सख्त मुज़म्मत की है, देखने में pro forma चीजें हैं, right? But when something happened in Spain, we issued a very strong statement because they had sanctioned on every single dhamaka that occurred in Pakistan. So it has particular meanings and nuances. I think, and then there was a question about the new initiatives in diplomacy. New initiatives, see, as I said, diplomacy is and its ethics and practice. It's not a static science. It's not a mathematical principle to solve and it's evolving, right? And evolving in relation to two things. One, the geopolitical situation. As I earlier said, the older diplomatic ethics, they were a construct of the Cold War. Simple, we have to historically if you see, वो सारे के सारे ethics जो थे, they were a construct of Cold War. Even जो ये है कि diplomatic premises की immunity होगी, it was primarily because उस जमाने में अमेरिका और रूस एक दूसरे के जासूस जो पकड़ते थे, right? They would bring it in their own embassy. So that was the legitimacy granted to that. जो इसकी थी historical evolution, if you see how these rules evolved, जो है कि non-interference in the internal affairs of other states. It meant कि Russian embassies in different countries will not propagate जो है from the embassy. खैर वो करते थे, हमारे यहाँ भी बहुत होता था. अब जब नया दौर आया है, उसमें it is a uni or a multipolar world, and the mode of communication and technology has changed. अब तो सारा कुछ ये जो मई में जंग हुई थी, इसमें कौन सी फॉरेन ऑफिस की स्टेटमेंट किसी ने देखी थी? सारा कुछ ट्वीट पे चल रहा था. उधर से जयशंकर साहब कर रहे थे, इधर से शारदा साहब. So it was all a blurring of personal and official capacities. नए इनिशिएटिव्स जिनकी हमें जरूरत है वो ये है to introduce these disciplines and these newer aspects into our diplomatic training. That is what we badly need. We are taking some actions, but I think they are far from being enough. We need more. Thank you.
Just to pinpoint on the question that was raised, what practice would you like to retire? Because you just mentioned.
What practice to retire? Right. On this, I will be very, very non-traditional in answer, but I firmly believe in that. Diplomacy में I assume हो सकता है सर के साथ सब मुझसे एग्री ना करें. एक बहुत बड़ा कंपोनेंट ये समझा जाता है कि आपने मैनरिक फॉर्मेलिटी और किस तरह से उन पूरे नॉर्म्स को फॉलो करना है कि अपने घर पे खाने पे बुलाना है तो अपने बड़ा गिलास किस तरफ रखना है, छोटा गिलास किस तरफ रखना है, और सफेद रंग का कपड़ा कहाँ रखना है. I have a problem with that. That is what you are talking. But I have a problem with that. Building human relations, one-to-one equation. वो कभी formalities में हो नहीं सकती. The most successful interactions that we had were the ones which violated all the diplomatic protocol norms, which were a clear violation of जब हमने सारे norms को ऐसी की तैसी फेर दी. उस वक्त आप वो एक पर्सनल फ्रेंडशिप का अंतर पैदा कर सकते हैं अपने ताल्लुकात में, जाती पर्सनल. In one of the countries that I was posted, एक खाने के गोश्त हम घर से भिजवाते थे, भी कौन को कहता था कि आप मुसलमान हो तो जो गोश्त आपने भेजना है ना, खाना है, वो एक दिन पहले मुझे भिजवा दें पका. Just look at the level of informality. मैं और वो he was head of the press, पूरी जो उनकी काउंसिल थी उसका he was the president. मैं वो और एक और हमारे दोस्त हम बाहर बैठ के उसके घर की सीढ़ियों में, बड़ा अच्छा मौसम था, सिगरेट पी रहे थे. उसकी बीवी अंदर से चीख रही थी कि जल्दी आओ खाना शुरू होने लगा है. When you develop that level of informality, when you develop that kind of personal one-to-one equation, while it was wrong, that is the level when you actually fulfill your objectives. अब जब मैं उसे कहूँगा ना कि जी अब ये काम करना है, उसके साथ एक इतनी informal equation set हो चुकी होगी कि वो मुझे ना नहीं कर सकेगा, बल्कि मेरे कहे बगैर इसको करना पड़ेगा. Because as I said कि जी सबसे ज़्यादा strong जो equation बनती है डिप्लोमेट की, वो ये है जब मेरी वाइफ और उस बंदे की वाइफ दोनों जाके इकट्ठे किसी सड़क से आलू छोले खा के आ जाए. Trust me, that relation doesn't go anywhere. Trust me, that relation goes. It's basically about human ego. It's basically playing with the other person's ego and about other person's person. जब अपने एक फॉर्मल डिनर पे बैठ के बात करनी है, वो तो फिर सरकारी बात है, उसमें वो फिर हम दफ्तर में करनी है. So that is where I take these practices have to retire.
There were some policy questions I'd like to address them. एक अफगान refugees क्या करें? एक ज़माने में 5 मिलियन थे, अभी तकरीबन 3 मिलियन से थोड़े कम हैं. कुछ चले गए हैं, कुछ नहीं गए हैं. तीसरी नस्ल आबाद हो गई वहाँ पे उनकी. और पाकिस्तान ने जो मुजाहरा किया हॉस्पिटैलिटी का, मेरा नहीं ख्याल कि दुनिया में किसी और जगह पे इस किस्म का हुआ होगा. लेकिन एक मसला आ गया. यूरोपियंस ये कहते थे हमें कि देखिए जब कोई इतनी देर रह ले हमारे मुल्क में तो हम उसको नेशनलिटी दे देते हैं. और हमारी नज़र में अब ये रिफ्यूजीज नहीं रहे बल्कि इकोनॉमिक माइग्रेंट्स बन गए. तो आप इनको जो भी परमानेंट रेजिडेंस के कार्ड्स हैं वो करें और इनको बाकायदा नेशनल बना लें. क्यों नहीं किया पाकिस्तान ने? इसलिए नहीं किया क्योंकि पाकिस्तान का ये ख्याल था कि जब अमन हो जाएगा तो ये वापस जाएंगे, ये रिफ्यूजीज हैं और उनको जाना चाहिए जैसे अमन होता है. उसके लिए हमने बड़ी कोशिश भी की. और अब जबकि वहाँ वाकई अमन होने का दावा कर रही है वहाँ की जो इस वक्त रजीम है, तो हमारी ख्याल है कि उनको वापस जाना चाहिए. इसलिए लोग कहते हैं कि ठीक है ये चले जाएं. लेकिन जो ज़्यादा बड़ी प्रॉब्लम हुई वो ये कि पाकिस्तान में दहशतगर्दी इसलिए ख़त्म नहीं हो रही कि इनमें से बहुत सारे रिफ्यूजी कैंप्स जो है ना वो स्लीपर सेल्स बन गए. और वो हमारे लिए नाकाबिल कबूल था. तीसरा कुछ ये भी तासुर फैला कि जो यहाँ पे पढ़ता है, यहाँ पे आपको पता हमारे हॉस्पिटल्स में स्पेशल अफगान डेस्क बना होता था. हमें मिले ना मिले ट्रीटमेंट उनको मिलता है. यूनिवर्सिटियों से पढ़ के जाते थे, लेकिन वहाँ जाके वो हमारे खिलाफ बोलने लग जाते थे, क्योंकि इतना वहाँ पर नैरेटिव इंडिया ने फैलाया हुआ पाकिस्तान के मुताबिक नेगेटिव, वो नेगेटिविटी इधर भी आ गई। इस वजह से पाकिस्तान सरकार बावजूद इसके कोई कोशिश करना चाहती थी कि चले हम इस तरह का कोई सिस्टम निकालें, नहीं निकाल सके। अगर वहाँ पे कोई गवर्नमेंट इस तरह की हो जाती, अशरफ गनी की गवर्नमेंट, कारजाई की गवर्नमेंट, उससे पहले की जो गवर्नमेंट थी, कि वो एटीट्यूड अपने साथ हमारे साथ हॉस्टाइल ना रखते, तो शायद हमारा एटीट्यूड भी रहेगा ना। 7 मिलियन बंगाली रहते हैं कराची में, रहते हैं ना, क्योंकि उधर से कभी हमें हॉस्टिलिटी की खबर उस तरीके से नहीं आई थी। इसलिए इन्होंने जो बन गया, उसी वजह से आज तक ये फैसला नहीं हम कर सके कि इनको यहीं पर ठहरा है, अपना शहरी बना लें। आवाज़ उठती है लेकिन फैसला नहीं हो पाता, क्योंकि एक हॉस्टाइल एनवायरनमेंट बनी हुई है। और पाकिस्तान में जब वहाँ पे जाते हैं तो इतना ज़्यादा अच्छा उनको नहीं ट्रीटमेंट मिलता। इसराइल का किसी ने पूछा, किसने पूछा था सवाल इसराइल का? लेकिन इसके ऊपर बड़ी थिंकिंग हुई है पाकिस्तान में, और एक दो बार ऐसे मौके आए हैं कि स्पेशली प्रेसिडेंट मुशर्रफ के ज़माने में कि वाकई हमने कोशिश की कि उनके साथ रब्ते करें। क्यों कोशिश करते थे? व्यू ये था, और मैं खुद भी 2 बार उनसे मिला न्यूयॉर्क में अपने स्टे के दौरान, इस वजह से करते थे कि हमारा ख्याल था कि हमारा इनके साथ डायरेक्ट झगड़ा कोई नहीं, फ़लस्तीनियों के हवाले से वो फ़लस्तीनियों की सपोर्ट करते रहेंगे, लेकिन इनकी दुश्मनी की वजह से इनका जो असर रसूख अमेरिका में है वो हमें नुकसान पहुंचाते हैं। दूसरा, उस दुश्मनी की वजह से इंडिया और इसराइल आपस में करीब हो गए हैं, वो भी हमें नुकसान पहुंचाते हैं। तो चलें कम से कम ये हम जो पार्ट है इसको खत्म करें। इंडिया जिसके साथ हमारी जंगें हुई हैं वहाँ तो हमारी एम्बेसी है, और इसराइल में क्यों ना हो। और अरबों में मुल्कों में से बहुत सारे उनके साथ जो कि एम्बेसी बना चुके हैं, तो हम क्यों ना करें। ये एक आर्गूमेंट दिया जाता है, लेकिन किसी हुकूमत ने उससे ज़्यादा कोशिश नहीं की। क्यों नहीं की? क्योंकि जो लार्जर पब्लिक ओपिनियन है पाकिस्तान में वो इसराइल के हामी नहीं था। उनका ख्याल था कि ये फ़लस्तीनियों के हकूक़ इन्होंने मारे हुए हैं, बल्कि कायदे आज़म ने जो गाइडेंस दी थी उस वक्त फ़लस्तीनी का मसला आ गया था, उन्होंने कहा था एक ही रियासत होनी चाहिए, वो फ़लस्तीन की रियासत होनी चाहिए, उसमें आगे जूज़ आबाद हो जाए। हमारी ये पोजीशन थी उस वक्त, लेकिन फैसला ये हुआ कि 2 रियासतें होंगी। तो पाकिस्तान में कोई भी हुकूमत ये फैसला नहीं करना चाहती है, क्योंकि वो अवामी उमंगों के खिलाफ होगा। इस वजह से कोई बंदा फैसला करना नहीं चाहता। उनको ये भी लगता है कि अगर हमने ये फैसला कर लिया तो खामखा यहाँ पे एक मुसीबत खड़ी हो जाएगी, तो कोई उसको हाथ नहीं। क्रिकेट में कहते हैं बाहर जाती गेंद, तो उसको कोई खेलता नहीं हो, कहते नहीं इसको जाने देंगे जो भी है। जिस दिन सारी मुस्लिम वर्ल्ड इसको एक्सेप्ट कर लेगी 2 स्टेट को और बन जाएगी, हम भी कर लेंगे। हमको इस मामले में हमें इनिशिएटिव लेने की कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है। और अब तो जब से उन्होंने इतना जुल्म किया है पिछले 2-3 साल में, 2 साल में, अब तो कोई भी हुकूमत सोच भी नहीं सकती है कि हम इसराइल को रिकग्नाइज कर लें, जब तक कि एक बाकायदा 2 स्टेट सोल्यूशन इस्टेब्लिश ना हो जाए, जो हम भी मान चुके हैं, पूरी दुनिया में माना जा चुका है। एक पॉलिसी क्वेश्चन पहले ज़्यादा एड्रेस करने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ। फिर आपने कहा कंडेमनेशन का, इसकी जो आपकी पोजीशन है डिप्लोमेटिक पार्लेंस में वो वेरी करती है। जो एक सबसे वीकेस्ट है वो कंसर्न, वी आर कंसर्न, फिर एक है कंडेम, वी डोंट रियली लाइक दिस, और एक है रिजेक्ट, कि हम इसको कबूल ही नहीं करते। डिपेंडिंग ऑन द इशू ये टर्म्स यूज की जाती है टू अनाउंस वेयर यू स्टैंड ऑन ए पर्टिकुलर इशू। आपने कहा आखिरी सवाल में कि आर्म फोर्सेस पर्सनल की तादाद बढ़ रही है, मेरा भी ख्याल बढ़ रही है। ये ज़्यादा सब के ज़माने से चल रहा है। 10% आर्म फोर्सेस के ऑफिसर सिविल सर्विसेज में आते हैं, वो आज भी आते हैं। बाकी सिविल सर्विसेज का तो मुझे नहीं पता, लेकिन फॉरेन सर्विस में उनका फ़ायदा होता रहा। मैं आपको वजह बताता हूँ। मेरा अपना जब मैं फॉरेन सेक्रेटरी बना, तो जो मैंने ऑफिस डायरेक्टर लगाया वो आर्म फोर्सेस से था। उसकी वजह ये है कि दे ब्रिंग समथिंग डिफरेंट टू द टेबल, और एक हैप्पी मिक्स है। सो आई हैव नेवर बीन पार्ट ऑफ दोज मूवमेंट्स विद इन द फॉरेन मिनिस्ट्री हु से कि नहीं जनाब ये इनके खिलाफ हम बाइकआउट करें, और इनको मैं नहीं करता। इसकी वजह ये कि ये पॉलिसी डिसीजन है। अगर जिस दिन ये पॉलिसी डिसीजन चेंज होगा तो ये खुद बहुत चेंज हो जाएगा। जब आपकी सर्विस में आ गए तो बल्कि एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव सर्विस का हमारा बैचमेट है, वो सबसे कामयाब उसकी सिविल सर्विसेज में नवीद अकरम चीमा, वो चीफ सेक्रेटरी पंजाब भी रहा है, वो फेडरल सेक्रेटरी भी रहा है, वो क्रिकेट बोर्ड में मैनेजर भी रहा है, चेयरमैन पब्लिक सर्विस, फेडरल पब्लिक सर्विस कमीशन भी रहा। तो ये आप उसको बॉक्स नहीं कर सकते, उसके एक डिसीजन लिया गया। इसी तरह बहुत सारे और डिसीजन है, कोटा सिस्टम 1973 के कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में था कि ये कोटा सिस्टम खत्म कर दिया जाएगा आफ्टर 10 इयर्स। आज अब 50-60 साल बाद भी उस कोटा सिस्टम को फॉलो कर रहे हैं। तो वो मेरे ख्याल में ये डिसीजंस जो हैं ये फॉरेन सर्विस के अंदर नहीं होते, ये सर्विस जो भी डिसीजन होंगे ये अल्टीमेटली एंड दिस डू सम ब्रिंग समथिंग ऑन द टेबल। आपने आई थिंक बाकी Mazhar has already announced pronounced on those matters, so that outdated practice I agree with him. I think in the हम जो ना याद है मुझे कि जो हमारे मोड ऑफ कम्युनिकेशन होते थे वो बड़े ही आउटडेटेड किस्म के थे, और किसी भी एम्बेसडर की ACR लिखी जाती थी, वो कितनी अच्छी टेलीग्राम भेजता है, कितनी अच्छा साइफर बड़ा मशहूर हो गया, कितना अच्छा साइफर भेजता है, कितनी जबरदस्त अंग्रेजी लिखी हो। और मेरे सेकंड एम्बेसडर थे 80s में, कतर में था, तो वो कहते थे यार कोई ऐसा लफ्ज़ बताओ जो साहब याकूब खान ने ना सुना, वो फॉरन में सुना। तो मैं इनसे बिल्कुल इत्तेफाक करता हूँ। असल सफारतकारी की जो रूह है टू विन फ्रेंड्स फॉर पाकिस्तान, अब वो कैसे जीतते हैं, दैट्स द इसेंस ऑफ इट। ठीक है, आप अपनी रिपोर्टिंग करेंगे, रूटीन में आप करते रहेंगे, तो वन प्रैक्टिस जो आपको फोरगो करनी है वो ये है कि आप मुलम्माकारी ना करें, इस किस्म के काम ना करें। आप सच और ऑनेस्टी के साथ लिखिए, कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता। आपकी अगर प्रमोशन नहीं भी होती तो डजंट मैटर, एज लॉन्ग एज यू कैन, और हो जाती है, इससे इन चीज़ों से कोई खराब नहीं होता। चलो,
I think we can go all day with these kind of discussions, but we've exceeded our designated time. I thank you both for your illuminating discussion. Please.
Sir.
Sorry, sir. Thank you very much for this introduction, sir. I just wanted to ask that today Pakistan has a serious challenge. Quickly, agar aap samjhe, for the future generation of India, saffronized and non-state actors rest it. So this is a challenge for the diplomacy of Pakistan, because the character we have seen, whatever has happened in Andhra, इसको कैसे affect करेगी हमारी diplomacy से, because this is a serious challenge now, it's a serious situation for Pakistan. So considering their mindset and this application, is there any, I mean, what options are available to Pakistan?
जरूर। On a lighter vein, जब क्लास में खत्म हो रही होती थी ना, तो एक बंदे को सवाल याद आ जाता था, और हम कहते आप तो याद जाने वाले थे, लेकिन आप तो जनरल हैं और यहाँ के प्रिंसिपल भी हैं, और आप ही की कर्टसी से हमें मिला है, तो इट्स अ प्रिविलेज फॉर अस टू रिसीव दैट क्वेश्चन। और ये बड़ा वैलिड क्वेश्चन है सर, इसलिए वैलिड है कि ये दोनों हमारे लिए, दोनों हमारी मशरकी और मगरबी सरहद बहुत चैलेंज बन के बनती है। और पाकिस्तान का आम शहरी हमसे पूछता है कि आप किस किस्म की खारजा पॉलिसी रन करते हो कि 4 में से 2 हमसायों के साथ आपके ताल्लुकात अच्छे हैं। ये उनको हक है पूछने का। मैं ये समझता हूँ कि डायलॉग एंड डिप्लोमेसी and kinetic responses are 2 sides of the same coin. कहीं आपको appropriate force use करनी पड़ती है और कभी डायलॉग करना पड़ता है। जब आपका डायलॉग फेल हो जाता है तो जंग शुरू हो जाती है, और जब जंग खत्म होती है तो डायलॉग शुरू हो जाता है। तो ये दोनों चीजें साथ साथ चलती हैं। इसलिए कल जब कैपिटल टॉक में मैं और डॉक्टर मलिया लोधी बैठे थे, मेरा थोड़ा सा मुख्तलिफ था रवैया, और मैं ये कहता था कि डायलॉग जरूर करें, लेकिन कोई जब आपके खून बहाते चले जाए और डायलॉग को ना सुने तो आपको कोई रिस्पॉन्स करना पड़ता है। और इसीलिए 10-11 अक्टूबर की दरमियानी रात जो हुआ वो इसलिए हुआ, और उसी के बाद डायलॉग शुरू हुआ। आप ये देखें कि पिछले 9 साल से मोदी सरकार ने हमारे खिलाफ हर किस्म की जारहियत की, हाइब्रिड वॉर की, डिसइंफॉर्मेशन कैंपेन चलाई, फेक वीडियोस के, फेक एनजीओस के साथ चलाई, और साथ में हमें उन्होंने सितंबर 2016 में सर्जिकल स्ट्राइक की, फिर फरवरी 2019 में उन्होंने बालाकोट पे हमला किया, और इस दफ़ा तो तमाम हदें वो खिलाफ गए। और जब हमने 2019 में उनका पायलट पकड़ लिया और अगले ही दिन वापस कर दिया, तो बजाय इसके कि वो हमारी खैर सगाली को अप्रिशिएट करते, वो कहते हैं ये कत्ल की रात होती है अगर तुम ना करते। अब जब हमने मई में वो जवाब दिया जो हमें देना चाहिए था बहुत अरसा पहले, तो मैं समझता हूं कि उससे दुनिया ने भी अप्रिशिएट किया। ये सिर्फ गुडी गुडी जो है ना वो चलता नहीं है। While I'm all for being a diplomat, I'm all for diplomacy, and we should exhaust every means and instrument available to you in the realm of diplomacy. I believe that a stage must come that you should defend your interests by all means, including by armed struggle. जी? जी जी, at the end of the day, UN में आपको पता है एक लॉ है, उसको इंटरनेशनल लॉ कहेंगे, कंसेंसस रेजोल्यूशन है जनरल असेंबली का, कि अगर कोई ऑक्यूपेशन में जो लोग हैं, they have every right to resist, including armed struggle. इसी तरह चार्टर में आर्टिकल 51 में लिखा हुआ है कि आप अपने डिफेंस में आप कोई भी हरबा ले सकते हैं। उसका मतलब ये होता है कि एनी मीन्स। तो मेरा ये ख्याल है कि हमने बड़े सालों के बाद इन दोनों सरहदों पर वो एटीट्यूड अपनाया है जो एक बावकार कौम का है। मे बी पीपल डोंट एग्री विद मी, आई रियली डोंट केयर, बट मेरी लाइफ लॉन्ग एक्सपीरियंस टेल्स मी कि अगर आपके एक गाल पे थप्पड़ लगा है और आप दूसरी गाल आगे कर देते तो वो मारे बोले दूसरी गाल पे। आप प्यार मोहब्बत ठीक, लेकिन कहीं ना कहीं आपको ये असर्ट करना पड़ता है अपना राइट टू डिफेंड योरसेल्फ, एंड इट शुड बी दैट मिक्स ऑफ पॉलिसी ऑन बोथ साइड्स, एंड आई थिंक इट विल डिलीवर रिजल्ट्स। जी जी प्लीज।
Unfortunately, we did inherit a heavy historical baggage, right? And that heavy historic baggage, both on our east and on our west, was none of our choosing. I agree we have a difficult situation, but it is not the worst situation that we have faced. We have been facing that kind of situation, much worse situation, all our lives. And it's not going to improve. ये चलता रहेगा. At least on eastern border, I don't have any hope. And let me tell you, 20 years ago, I was the strongest proponent of Amanti Asha. Initiative. I still am, but it's not possible. I still believe in that Amanti Asha. But जैसे वो फैज़ अहमद फैज़ ने कहा था ना कि यूं था मैंने फकत चाहा था यूं हो जाए, वो मुमकिन नहीं है. So we are going to continuously face that kind of a situation. Relations दो domains में मैं देखता हूँ. One are the normal periods, the normal duration, जहाँ पे you have to be very very positive towards everything. उसके अलावा आपका गुजारा नहीं चलता है, particularly आजकल के ज़माने में. And the other area is the conflict situation. Since we are sitting all among ourselves, so I think I can talk a bit candidly. When you have a problem, if you are a part of the solution only, right, you are not going to occupy a reasonable or position on the negotiating table. If you are a part of the solution to the problem only and not a part of the problem, then you will have no worth on the negotiating table. जब भी वो negotiating table लगेगा, जब से पहले लगेगा, बाद में लगेगा, जैसे भी होगा, wherever the final balance strikes, उसमें part of the solution की कोई ज़्यादा, because वो तो it is something taken for granted ना. If you want to have a reasonable position that you deserve, you have to be part of the problem. Otherwise, आपकी तो उस negotiation table पे जरूरत ही नहीं होगा. You are already what everybody wants. ये थोड़ा मेरा last remark थोड़ा candid था, but I think we should speak out our.
You always provoke me. जयशंकर साहब कहते हैं कि जो best diplomats पता कौन थे? शिव कृष्ण और राम और वो राघव क्या था जो गए थे हैं? नहीं वो जिन्होंने जाके लंका डाल दी थी, वो कहते जी वो सबसे वो है, बेशक लंका को आग लगा दी लेकिन कम से कम सबसे अच्छे डिप्लोमेट थे कॉमिकल लगने से.
Thank you so much for this discussion.
Raman.
And I think based on your last remarks, if these conflicts are going to go on in the future, these conversations will become even more relevant. And thank you so much to the audience for joining us on as we embark on this journey. We will be discussing more detailed elements of our foreign policy and foreign relations in terms of the conduct and the diplomatic demeanor. I'd like to thank our guests for being here, for allowing us to listen to their thoughts. And I would like for you to just briefly give a round of applause to the students who have an exam tomorrow. And they are very
अगर कल फेल हुए ना हमारी खैर लेकिन I also want to thank Elise, you are the president of the society, Amar, you were very patient, and of course हमारे जो host हैं इस वक्त moderator Asher साहब, but above all Dr. Hassan Jaleel, Dr. Zaid, Layla Sahiba, and General Saab, whose hospitality we have enjoyed in this. Thank you so much. Allah bless you all. Allah bless our country.
We are also very thankful, and to express our gratitude, I'd like to invite Dr. Hassan Jaleel Shah. I'd like to invite Dr. Hassan Jaleel Shah to express our gratitude and present our honorable panelists with a token of our appreciation. Sir, Ambassador Master Javed, please.
ये शीट दे देना.
May I request the panelists and our principal to stay on stage, and may I call the team of NUSTPAS for a group photo. A group photo on stage. To the students, thank you for giving us of your time. We won't keep you from your midterm exam prep any longer.